Welcome to Repetition and Contrast, where we provide tools for creative entrepreneurs. Continuing our discussion about getting organized. Again, this particular chart is from the book Getting Things Done by David Allen, and I highly recommend that you read the book. He's also got an audiobook available if you don't feel like you have time to read. What I want to communicate to you today is this idea that once you have collected all the things that you have to do, you need to organize those things. You need to put them in buckets that represent what they are and what you need to do with these things that you have to do. So for some things that you have to do, you have to organize into monumental task lists. For example, right now I'm working on a graphic novel and an illustrated novel, this YouTube channel, and some stuff related to curriculum design for the school where I teach, so on and so forth. And in order to wrap my head around getting all of that stuff done, I need to break things down into digestible chunks. And that process is the organizational process. I talked about that a little bit last week, but in a nutshell, the idea from my perspective and what I think works most effectively for creatives is for you to take like a big project, any project that's going to take you longer than 90 minutes, you need to break it down into smaller chunks. And each one of those smaller chunks probably should take you less than 90 minutes. And that way, you have this consistent thing happening where you're doing something, you're able to check something off of your list, and then you're moving on to the next thing. And by organizing your larger projects into these smaller chunks, you'll be able to see them as bite-sized components, and you'll be able to get the whole thing done. A lot of times when I talk to people who are working on giant projects, the real reason that they're not getting them done is because it just seems too overwhelming for them, and they're not able to see the forest for the trees, or they can only see the forest and they can't see the trees, you know. And so the idea is that we're going to break things down into things that are actionable and things that are not actionable. So for example, if I'm working on an illustrated novel project for a client, and I have on my to-do list that I have to draw 24 images for this novel in addition to designing a cover, which is a standard thing that I seem to need to do a lot. I can't start drawing the images until the person writing the novel has written the novel. I usually like to wait for someone to finish the novel before I start illustrating, by the way. That's a whole other topic for another day, but I won't start an illustration when someone says, "Hey, I finished a chapter," because what I have found for most people, myself included when I'm writing, is that I'm going to go back and revise that chapter, and I might have to throw out whole, set pieces or whole chunks of things in order to make the story work. And there's no way of knowing what will land on the editing room floor until the writing's finished. So I don't usually start a project when I'm collaborating with someone until they are finished with their portion of the work in terms of the system for the project. But so what I'm trying to communicate is, if I have this list of images that I've got to draw, they're not actionable until the writer's finished writing their story. Right. So I might have to put this on my to-do list because I've already been contracted to do it, but I'll put it in a section that is not urgent. It's something that I'll have to revisit at the point in time when someone else has executed their actions so that I can get to it. Another thing that might happen with a list of things that you need to do is that you may just decide, from the sheer preposterous nature of how many things you realize that you're trying to do, that you need to not do some of them, and there are two categories that those kinds of things can land in. They may be trash, meaning I'm never going to do this. I'm going to throw this thing away and get it out of your head completely. The other thing that it might be is what's referred to by David Allen's book as a someday maybe idea. And in that scenario, what you're doing is you're saying, hey, that's a cool idea. That's a cool project, but it's not something that I can take on right now. I'm going to put it in the someday maybe category, and I'll get to it if I get to it. The last kind of non-actionable item that is in David Allen's book, and I'm not sure exactly how to talk about this, but he calls it a reference item. So here's the scoop. I just told you to organize everything you have to do, and then we have to organize the things you have to do. Well, a reference item is not something you have to do. It's something that maybe you need in order to do something. In that case, David Allen's talking about things that land in email or land in communications during projects where it's information that you need in order to do something, but it's not an actionable item. It's just a piece of information. It's on this chart that I'm showing you, so I wanted to make sure I mentioned why it's there, but it's beyond the purview of what I'm trying to talk about today. Now, the next thing that I would say is that I'm a big proponent of this idea that if you've got to do something that will take you a very, very small amount of time and it's due really soon, you should very early in your week get those things done. I'll give you an example. I have a list of things that I have to do every week for a couple different jobs. I've got a job where I'm dealing with communications for a specific organization, and I've got a job where I am teaching classes. Outside of those two jobs, I do a whole bunch of freelance stuff, and I do a whole lot of projects for myself, for my own creative output. But specifically, the communications work that I do for a specific organization that I'm not going to name in this video requires me to do things weekly, and it's the same list of things every week. And the way that I handle that is I put it on a Trello list, and generally it's the first thing that I do at the beginning of the week. And I see my week as beginning on Sunday. And so basically either on Sunday afternoon or on Monday morning, I just crank through that Trello list as fast as I can so that I can get on to what I see as being more important work. You know, the things that I have to do on a weekly basis are things that have to get done. And so they're on my to-do list. They're organized as things that I have to do, but they are usually things that I've already put a lot of thought into how to execute them. And so re-executing them tends to be fast and frankly, somewhat easy. And I'm always trying to build systems so that I have to do less stuff whenever I have repetitive actions. The more I can figure out how to automate repetitive actions, the more that I can get to other things that are more important. So that's the idea here. Okay, so then the other thing is that if it is an action item that will take less than 2 minutes, just get it done. Okay, I've got just a couple more things to say about this. And I'm going to repeat my word about the calendar, which is don't put anything on the calendar unless you absolutely have to, because things that land on the calendar will, if they don't get done, they end up having to be reorganized later. And that becomes a terrible situation where you're just simply reorganizing things over and over and over again. The best thing to do is, unless it has to be done on a specific day, like, for example, I have to teach a class on Tuesday at 10. Okay, well, if it didn't happen on Tuesday at 10, it's never going to happen, right? But I'm not going to do things like, hey, in order to get my graphic novel finished, I have to draw page 5 by this Friday. The reason I'm not going to do that is because if I don't quite get all of it finished by this Friday and then it lingers, I've got to change that due date, and it probably changes the due dates for all the other things that follow it. And then if there are a few weeks where I don't get things done, and then I have to change massive amounts of data for the project, all that ends up being is a time suck. And we don't want to do that. And then the last thing that I want to say is that to-do lists have extraordinary power. And I think I'm going to save my conversation about how powerful to-do lists are for next week.